In this video I'm going to talk about how to come back in chess. I'm going to share 4 rules or 4 concepts I guess on how to get from a losing position into a winning one. To illustrate this I will show one of my own games in which I lost a piece very early on into the game but was able to win anyways. I hope you guys will find this video useful and yeah, let's dive into the game. In this game I had the black pieces and my opponent played d4. I played knight f6 and my opponent played the London system, which is bishop to f4. And normally here I play the move knight to h5. Now the point of knight to h5 is to attack the bishop immediately and basically get my opponent out of their theory. But instead I kind of mindlessly played d5. My opponent played e3 and I was like, okay, wait, I forgot to play knight h5, but I can play it anyways, right? So here I played knight h5, which is simply a blunder because my opponent can take the knight. So I was down a knight on move 3 in this game, which is of course not great, but I was like, okay, I'm down material, but I will still play on a little bit at least. So I played g6, I just wanted to develop my pieces here, bishop to g7. And here's kind of the first important moment in the game. Now I guess it's a good idea to kind of explain the main theme in this video, which is that if you're down material, if you have a losing position, what you want to achieve is a complicated position and you want to attack your opponent. You want to make the game complicated so that you give your opponent the chance to blunder back basically. And in order to do that, you really need as many pieces as possible on the board. Now of course here, if I move back, which I didn't want to trade pieces. Well, of course, the white's bishop here is much better than my bishop. It's on a more active square. But in order to win a game if you're down material, you really need all your remaining material to try and attack your opponent. And if you're going to trade material, if I took here, it only benefits white here, because the less material on the board, the easier it is for white to actually convert a winning position. So instead I moved my bishop back. And here my opponent went for some kind of kingside attack. I'm not sure why actually, because it would have been better if he just developed his pieces first. But okay, he's up material, he can probably get away with it. So I developed my pieces as well. And here's kind of the, well, after a couple of moves here, again here, very important. I don't want to take back with the h pawn, because if I take back this way, my opponent can again trade pieces, which is not to my advantage. So instead I took back with the f pawn, and here I developed my queen and castled queenside. Now this is kind of the second rule, which is you want to imbalance the game, especially where you place your king. Now the reason why is, again, we want to go for some kind of attack. Now the main thing you want to achieve in an attack is basically to get your pieces active as well as use your pawns to attack. So if I go back one move and I castle kingside, for example, and my opponent does the same, I really want to push my pawns here, right? I want to create some kind of chaos on the board. I want to use my pawns to attack, but of course if I push my pawns now, it creates a lot of weaknesses on my king side and, well, my king. So if I instead castle queenside, which I did in the game, it's much more safe to actually push my pawns because it really doesn't leave any weaknesses behind. So what you basically want to achieve is create 2 battlefields. Right here, when I castle my king to the queenside, white probably will have to go and attack my queenside, my king here, and I can attack my opponent's kingside here. It's very likely my opponent will in the future either castle or will keep his king here in the center. And in both ways, basically, going for the attack with my pawns is a very good idea. So after I castle queenside, my opponent actually went for the queenside attack with b4. He took back, he actually sacrificed the pawn here, but it isn't all that great for me because, as you can see, my king is quite weak. The open files are really not to my benefit. He moved back, and this is kind of the third rule, which is to you really want to get your pieces active, or even if you have to sacrifice a pawn in this case. So here my opponent took the pawn. Of course I cannot recapture the pawn. I have 2 attackers, but my opponent also has 2 defenders here. But my idea here was to basically activate my bishop to f5. And my pointer is to go for the attack. I really want to go for this attack, put my knight on c2, attack the king, fork the king and the rook actually, and create some kind of nice attack. So what's actually interesting here, this is the final rule, the 4th rule, is that I actually didn't only sacrifice a pawn, but I also sacrificed my rook here basically. My queen and rook are on the same diagonal. I have to move my queen here. And my opponent will be able to take my rook and win even more material. But the last rule I want to explain here is that if you need to sacrifice more material to go for the attack, you probably should do it. When you're down material really doesn't matter anymore. It's all about the attack, it's all about complicating the position, and if you need to sacrifice more material to do so, it's probably a good idea. But you also can see here is that after I move my queen, my opponent actually traded their most active piece, their bishop, for my most passive piece, basically. Okay, maybe this rook is even more passive, although it defends the pawn, which is also important. Let's go back for a move. So I sacrificed my rook, my most passive piece, for my opponent's most active piece. Of course, in the long run, my rook is more valuable than the bishop, but right now in this attack, my rook was definitely worth less than my opponent's bishop. So instead of taking back right away, I first checked with the knight to basically get my opponent's king a little bit weaker, and here I took back the bishop. I could have also taken this rook, maybe, it didn't really matter, but I didn't really want to trade any more material than necessary. Of course, my knight here is still very strong. So in this position, I got basically all I could wish for. I have the attack, I have the initiative, my opponent is under some pressure, his king is kind of weak, and here I just have to go for the attack. So, first of all, my opponent pinned the knight to the queen. I moved out of the way. Of course, my knight is still defended, but here I think my opponent was able to take the knight and trade his rook for 2 pieces, which is, even in general, pretty good often. But he didn't do it, which is a pretty big mistake, I believe. So instead, he still played a reasonably good move. He forced some trades, but at least I have my bishop still here. So, finally, I went for the pawn storm on the king side. This is a very strong move by me. My bishop was very passive on this diagonal, and here I simply attack the rook, but I also make sure that my opponent can't really double up on this file where my king is, because this square will always be controlled by the bishop. So, my opponent moved out of the way, and here my opponent started to make a severe mistake, because here he tried, I think he tried to get his king to a more safe place, but instead he should have went for the attack, basically, as I pointed out, with maybe a5, a6 here. Because here, he actually creates a lot of new weaknesses. I played a very strong move, bishop to e4, pinning the knight to the rook, of course. And here my opponent tried to win his king to save it, but here actually pinned his own king now, instead of the rook, which is even worse. And I started to put a lot of pressure on this knight. And what's actually interesting here is that, of course, in a position in which white has more material, it's sometimes even a good idea to give up some material in order to get a better position. So here, for example, after I take the rook here, again, although I win back some material, this actually isn't that good, because my opponent is still up material and he traded his most active piece. But in this case specifically, he has a big weakness here, so I can actually take her, and this is pretty good for me. I win the bishop first of all. So when I move back here, what's actually interesting is not only that this knight is pinned to the rook, but actually also a little bit to this pawn, because my rook is very active here. So instead my opponent moved back, which is a big mistake here, again pinning himself. And here I simply went for the attack. I actually sacrificed some more material here. Even sacrificed my bishop here, my very strong bishop, to take the knight. My opponent cannot take back here, because if he takes back he gets forked. The king and the queen are both under attack. So instead my opponent moved back with his king. I took the bishop, and here, although my opponent is still up material, of course you can see this position is very complicated. And here my opponent made the final mistake. He simply took the pawn. I took the rook here, of course. And I basically regained all my material. But I have one problem, which is that I'm very down on the clock. You can see I only have 11 seconds here. My opponent has over 1 minute. Okay, sorry for that. A very noisy truck went by, and I think it messed up my audio. But again, if my opponent took the pawn, I take the rook. And if my opponent took his timer, actually, he would have been able to find queen f1. I'm very down on time. So here, this would have still been winning for me, but I have to be very fast and very accurate here. But instead, my opponent actually made another blundering. This happens quite often. When your opponent starts blundering one move or one piece, it's basically a downfall from them. It's kind of a domino effect, because here my opponent played king to h2. And this allows checkmate in one. So I actually won the game here, which is very nice. So I guess to summarize this video, the most important thing to take away from this video is that if you're down material, you really want to complicate the position and make sure you give the opponent the opportunity to blunder back, basically. Because of course, if you're down material, you have a losing position, You can't magically get a winning position out of nowhere. You really need the opponent to blunder. Of course, in many games your opponent won't blunder, but in my opinion this is kind of the best way to try and get back from a losing position to a winning one. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video and learned something from it. Make sure if you liked the video to give the video a like, to subscribe if you want to see more of course, and yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys next time.